In the summer of 1978, the Chickasaw County Fair in northeast Iowa was the biggest event between Waterloo and the Minnesota border. 4 days of livestock shows, pie contests, carnival rides, and the thing that brought more people through the gate than everything else combined, the tractor pull. If you've never been to a tractor pull, let me explain what it is and why it matters, because this story doesn't make sense without understanding the culture. A tractor pull is simple. You hook a tractor to a weighted sled on a dirt track. The sled has a mechanism that transfers weight forward as it moves. The farther it goes, the heavier it gets. The tractor that pulls the sled the farthest wins. There are weight classes, just like boxing. You compete against machines roughly your size. But here's the thing about tractor pulls in 1978 Iowa. They weren't just competitions. They were advertisements. Every John Deere dealer, every International Harvester dealer, every Case and Alice Chalmers dealer within 100 miles sent their best machines to the county fairs. Winning the pull was winning the argument. It was proof, in front of thousands of witnesses, that your brand was stronger than the other brand. The farmers in the stands weren't just watching entertainment. They were watching a product demonstration. And the machine that won on Saturday night at the fair was the machine they walked into the dealership to ask about on Monday morning. Rick Sievert understood this better than anyone in Chickasaw County. Rick was 48 years old and had run Sievert Implement, the John Deere dealership in New Hampton, since 1964, when he'd bought it from his uncle with a bank loan and a handshake. He was a salesman in his bones, big smile, firm handshake. The kind of man who could make you feel like buying a $40,000 tractor was the smartest financial decision of your life, even when you knew in your gut it wasn't. Rick had discovered the tractor pull as a sales tool in 1974, when he'd entered a dealership demonstration, John Deere 4430 in the county fair pull, and won the unlimited class. The next week, he sold 3 443s, 3 tractors in a week, in a county where he normally sold 3 a month. The math was irresistible. From that day forward, the Chickasaw County Fair Tractor Pull was Rick Sievert's personal trade show. He entered every year. He brought the newest, most powerful machine in his showroom. He won every year, 4 consecutive years, 74, 75, 76, 77, 4 trophies on his office wall, and more importantly, 4 years of farmers watching his green machine dominate the track and then walking through his showroom door the following week. In 1978, Rick had a new weapon. The John Deere 4440 had just been released, the flagship of the Iron Horses series, the most powerful row crop tractor Deere had ever produced. 130 horsepower from a turbocharged diesel engine, a sound guard cab with air conditioning, power shift transmission, hydraulics that could lift a house. The sticker price was $40,200, and Rick had the first one in the county. He'd been showing it off all summer. He'd parked it in front of his dealership on Main Street with a banner that said, "The new 4440, come drive the future." He'd taken it to 3 other county fairs already, entering it in the tractor pull at each one, winning each time by margins that weren't even close. The Chickasaw County Fair was going to be the crown jewel, his home turf, his crowd, the biggest audience of the summer. Rick had been talking about it at the co-op for weeks. "Boys," he'd say, leaning on the counter with the confidence of a man who has already won, "you're going to see something special on Saturday night. That 4440 is going to set a track record. I'm talking full pull, 300 feet. Nobody's ever gone full pull at Chickasaw. This year it happens." Nobody doubted him. The 4440 was the most powerful tractor anyone in the county had ever seen. It had more horsepower than most of the machines it would compete against combined. The only question wasn't whether Rick would win. It was by how much. The fair opened on a Wednesday. The tractor pull was Saturday night. By Thursday, the entry list was posted on the bulletin board at the grandstand, and it confirmed what everyone expected. Rick Sievert, Sievert Implement, John Deere 4440 Unlimited Class. Below his entry, in pencil, added late, was another name that made the regulars do a double take. Virgil Tesdall, Farmall Super M, Unlimited Class. Let me tell you about Virgil Tesdall because you need to understand this man the same way you need to understand the ground before you plow it. Virgil was 63 years old. He'd farmed 200 acres southeast of New Hampton since 1937, the year he took over from his father, the same year the dust was still settling from the worst agricultural disaster in American history. He'd been 18 years old, freshly married to a girl named Ruth Halverson from the next township, and the owner of land that most people thought was too small to support a family. He'd proved them wrong for 41 years, not by expanding, not by borrowing, not by chasing the newest equipment or the highest yields. Virgil farmed the way his father had taught him, slow, careful, attentive to the ground, suspicious of debt, and allergic to anything that cost more than it was worth. In 41 years, Virgil had owned exactly 4 tractors. A Farmall F20 that his father left him, a Farmall H that he bought used in 49, a Farmall Super M that he bought used in 61, and another Farmall Super M that he bought at a bankruptcy auction in March of 78 for $800. That second Super M was the one that was about to ruin Rick Sievert's Saturday night. The Farmall Super M was International Harvester's masterpiece of the early 50s, a no-nonsense, mechanically simple, ridiculously overbuilt workhorse that produced about 48 horsepower from a gasoline engine and could pull stumps, break sod, and drag loaded wagons up hills that would stall machines with twice its rated power. The secret was in the engineering. The Super M had a gear ratio in first gear that produced enormous drawbar pull at walking speed, the kind of sustained, low-speed torque that modern tractors had traded away in favor of higher road speeds and bigger horsepower numbers. At the drawbar, in first gear, a well-tuned Super M could pull within 15% of its own weight. That's astonishing. Most modern tractors could pull 60 to 70% of their weight. The Super M could pull 85. But nobody talked about drawbar pull in 1978. They talked about horsepower. Horsepower was on the brochure. Horsepower was in the advertisements. Horsepower was what Rick Sievert sold. And on the horsepower chart, the Super M's 48 looked like a joke next to the 4440's 130. Virgil knew the difference. He'd been pulling things with Farmalls for 40 years, and he understood something that the horsepower charts didn't show, that a tractor pull isn't a horsepower contest. It's a traction contest. The machine that puts the most force into the ground through its drive wheels wins. And force into the ground is a function of 3 things: weight, gear ratio, and tire grip. The 4440 had more horsepower, but it was also designed for field work at speed. Its gearing was optimized for 6, 8, 10 miles per hour. In a pull, at 1 or 2 miles per hour, much of that horsepower was wasted. The engine was spinning faster than it needed to, and the transmission was converting RPM into speed instead of force. The Super M was the opposite. In first gear, it moved at a walking pace, barely 2 miles per hour. But every ounce of engine power was being converted into forward pull. The gearing multiplied the engine's torque by a factor that the 4440's power shift transmission couldn't match. And then there was weight. The 4440 weighed about 14,000 pounds. The Super M weighed about 6,000. That should have been a massive advantage for the Deere. Heavier machines have more traction because they press the tires harder into the ground. But Virgil had spent 3 months preparing for the fair, and he'd done something that nobody knew about. He'd added weight. Not openly. Not with flashy wheel weights or front-end suitcase weights that everyone would see. Virgil had filled the Super M's rear tires with calcium chloride solution, a common practice among old-timers that younger farmers had mostly forgotten. The liquid added about 1,500 pounds to the rear axle without changing the tractor's appearance. He'd also fabricated a set of internal frame weights from railroad rail stock, 200 pounds of steel hidden inside the belly pan where nobody would see them. Total weight of Virgil's Super M on the night of the pull, approximately 8,200 pounds. still lighter than the 4440, but much heavier than it looked. Now let me tell you about Thursday afternoon at the fair, because that's when the humiliation started. The tractors were staged in a roped-off area behind the grandstand where the public could walk through and look at the machines that would compete Saturday night. It was part trade show, part petting zoo. The farmers brought their wives and kids and walked the line, admiring the equipment, talking to the owners, kicking tires the way farmers have kicked tires since tires were invented. Rick Sievert had his 4440 polished to a mirror finish. He'd set up a banner, Sievert Implement, home of the 4440, and was handing out brochures and business cards to anyone who came within 10 feet. He was in his element. This was selling. This was what he lived for. Virgil's Super M was parked at the far end of the line, as far from Rick's gleaming 4440 as possible. It wasn't polished. It wasn't washed. The paint was faded red with spots of surface rust. The seat had a tear held together with duct tape. The exhaust pipe had a slight lean to it. The tractor looked like what it was, a 26-year-old machine bought at a bankruptcy auction for $800. Rick noticed it Thursday afternoon. He walked the entire line, he always did, sizing up the competition, and stopped in front of the Super M. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he started to laugh. Not a polite laugh, not a chuckle. A full, loud, performing for an audience laugh that made every person within 50 yards turn to look. "Who entered this?" Rick called out, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Who entered a Farmall Super M in the unlimited class?" Virgil was sitting on a hay bale behind his tractor, eating a ham sandwich. He looked up. "I did." Rick walked over. The crowd, maybe 40 people browsing the staging area, drifted closer, sensing a show. Virgil Tesdall. Rick said the name like he was reading it off a list of people who owed him money. "You're pulling against my 4440 with a Super M." "That's right. A 1952 Super M. 52, yes. 48 horsepower. Closer to 52 on a good day." Rick turned to the crowd with the timing of a man who'd been performing for audiences his whole life. "Folks, this man, and I mean no disrespect, Virgil, you're a fine farmer. This man is bringing a 52 horsepower tractor to compete against a 130 horsepower John Deere 4440. The finest machine Deere has ever built." He paused. "That's like bringing a bicycle to a car race." Laughter. The crowd was with Rick. They always were. Virgil didn't react. He took another bite of his sandwich. "Tell you what," Rick said, his voice rising to include everyone within earshot. "I'm so confident my 4440 will beat this Farmall that I'll make a bet. Right here, right now, in front of God and everyone. $10,000 says that Super M doesn't pull the sled past the 100-foot mark. $10,000. Cash. Anyone want to take that bet?" Silence. $10,000 in 1978 was more than most farmers in Chickasaw County netted in a year. Nobody was going to bet against Rick Sievert and his 4440. That was throwing money away. Virgil finished his sandwich. He folded the wax paper, put it in his pocket, and stood up. "I'll take it," he said. Rick's laugh faltered, just for a second. He'd expected the bet to go unchallenged. He'd expected it to be a punchline, not a wager. "You'll take it," Rick repeated. $10,000. You're 4,440 against my Super M. I pull past 100 feet. I win. I don't. You win. "Virgil, I'm trying to be friendly here. That tractor cost you, what, $800? You're betting $10,000 on an $800 machine against a $40,000 machine." "That's right." "You can't afford to lose $10,000. "Then I'd better not lose." The crowd had gone quiet. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two men, one with money and one without, making a bet that one of them couldn't afford to pay and the other couldn't afford to lose. Not financially. Rick could cover $10,000, but reputationally. If the JD dealer's $40,000 showcase lost to an $800 Farmall in front of 2,000 people, every sale he'd make for the next 5 years would start with the customer saying, "Isn't that the tractor that lost to a Farmall at the fair?" Rick looked at Virgil. Virgil looked back. Nothing in Virgil's face had changed. Not the eyes, not the jaw, not the slight tension in his shoulders. He was calm, the way a man is calm when he knows something nobody else knows. "You've got a deal," Rick said. They shook hands. 40 people witnessed it. The news spread through the fair like fire through dry hay. By Friday morning, every farmer in Chickasaw County knew about the bet. By Friday afternoon, the grandstand was sold out for Saturday night's pull, 300 extra tickets beyond the usual. People who hadn't been to the tractor pull in years were coming. People who had never been to a tractor pull were coming. This wasn't just a competition anymore. This was a story. David and Goliath. $800 against 40,000. The farmer against the dealer. The past against the future. Saturday night, 7:30 p.m. The grandstand was full. 2,000 people plus another 500 standing along the fence line. The track was groomed, the sled was loaded, and the announcer was warming up the crowd with the undercard classes. Let me describe the track, because the conditions matter. The pull track at the Chickasaw County Fair was 300 feet of graded dirt. Not clay, not sand, but a mixture of both that the fairground crew spent all week preparing. They watered it, rolled it, groomed it, and watered it again. The goal was a surface that provided traction without being too sticky or too loose. But Saturday had been hot, 91 degrees, the hottest day of the fair. The top layer of the track had dried out by evening, creating a hard crust on top with softer, slightly moist dirt beneath. This was important, and here's why. A heavier tractor would break through the crust and reach the moister dirt below, which offered better grip. A lighter tractor might ride on top of the crust and slip. The 4440 at 14,000 pounds would break through. The Super M at 8,200 pounds, with its hidden weight, was right on the edge. This was Virgil's gamble. If his calcium-filled tires and hidden frame weights punched through the crust, he'd have grip. If they didn't, he'd slide on the surface like a skater on ice. The Unlimited class was the last event of the night, the main attraction. 8 tractors had entered. 3 John Deeres, 2 International Harvesters, 1 Case, 1 Oliver, and Virgil's Super M. The other machines were all modern, 70s models with 100 horsepower or more. Virgil's Super M was the oldest machine on the track by 20 years. The other competitors pulled first. 2 of the John Deeres made respectable pulls, 218 feet and 241 feet. The Case pulled 204. One of the IHs broke a U-joint at 112 feet and was towed off the track. The Oliver made it to 189. Then Rick Sievert climbed into the cab of his 4440. The crowd roared. Rick waved through the sound guard cab window, put the tractor in gear, and signaled the hookman. The chain went taut. The 4440's turbocharged diesel screamed. The rear tires, massive brand-new Firestone Field and Roads, bit into the track and threw dirt 20 feet behind the machine. The sled moved, fast at first, then slower as the transfer weight mechanism pushed more and more resistance onto the runners. The 4440 was pulling hard. You could see the front end lift slightly as the rear axle took the load. The crowd was counting the markers. 100 feet, 150, 200. The sled was getting heavy now, and the 4440's tires were starting to dig ruts. 220, 240. The engine note changed, deeper, strained. 255. The tires broke traction. The 4440's rear end slid sideways, the wheels spinning in the ruts they dug, and the tractor stopped. 258 feet. The crowd erupted. It was the longest pull of the night, by 17 feet. Not a full pull, but dominant. Rick climbed out of the cab, pumping his fists, pointing at the crowd, already celebrating what he assumed was a victory. He looked toward the staging area where Virgil's Super M sat waiting. "Your turn, Virgil," Rick shouted across the track. "100-foot mark. Remember the bet." Virgil didn't respond. He was already on the tractor. Now let me tell you about the next 90 seconds because they're the reason this story is still told in Chickasaw County. Virgil drove the Super M onto the track slowly, walking pace. The engine was idling, a steady, deep thrum that was almost peaceful compared to the scream of the turbocharged Deere. The crowd was curious but skeptical. A few people were already heading for the exits, assuming the outcome was settled. The announcer was hedging. "And here's our last competitor, folks. Virgil Tesdall on a 1952 Farmall Super M. That's a real vintage machine, folks. Let's give him a hand for bringing some history to the track." Polite applause, the kind you give a man walking to the gallows. Virgil positioned the Super M at the starting line. The hookman attached the chain to the drawbar. Virgil set the throttle, not wide open, not screaming RPM, but about 3/4. The engine settled into a steady, purposeful rhythm. He put the tractor in first gear, the lowest gear, the gear that nobody used in a tractor pull because it was too slow. Every other competitor had pulled in second or third gear, trading torque for speed, trying to build momentum before the sled got heavy. Virgil wasn't building momentum, he was building force. He released the clutch. The Super M crept forward, not fast, 2 miles per hour, maybe less. The chain went taut. The sled started to move. At first it looked pathetic. The crowd was used to tractors lunging forward, tires smoking, engines screaming. The Super M was moving like it was out for a Sunday drive. No drama, no smoke, no spinning tires. But here's what the crowd didn't see. The Super M's rear tires weren't spinning at all. The calcium chloride weight had pushed the tires through the dried crust and into the moist dirt beneath. The lugs were gripping. Every revolution of the wheel was translating into forward motion. No slippage. Zero wasted energy. The sled moved 10 feet, 20, 30. People who had been heading for the exits stopped, turned around, watched. 40 feet, 50. The sled was getting heavier now. The transfer weight sliding forward, increasing the resistance exponentially. This was where most tractors started to struggle. This was where tires started to spin. The Super M's tires didn't spin. 60 feet, 70. The engine note hadn't changed. The same steady 3/4 throttle rhythm it had started with. No strain, no scream, just a constant, relentless pull. Rick Sievert was standing at the edge of the track. His smile was gone. 80 feet, 90. The crowd was silent now. The kind of silence that happens when 2,000 people simultaneously realize they're watching something they didn't expect. 95 feet, 98, 100 feet. Virgil had won the bet, but he didn't stop. The Super M kept pulling. 110, 120. The sled was heavy now, heavier than anything the Super M should have been able to move, according to the horsepower charts. But the horsepower charts didn't account for what was happening at the contact patch between the tire and the ground. They didn't account for the gear ratio that was multiplying the engine's modest torque into enormous drawbar pull. They didn't account for the weight that nobody could see, pressing the tires into the earth like thumbs pressing into clay. 140, 160. The crowd was making noise now, not cheering exactly, but a growing murmur of disbelief that was building toward something bigger. 180, 200, 200 feet. The $800 Farmall had just passed where the case had stopped. It had passed where the Oliver had stopped. It was approaching the distance where 2 of the 3 John Deeres had stopped. The engine note finally changed. Deeper, slower, working harder. The Super M was reaching its limits. The sled was punishing, but the tires were still gripping. The tracks in the dirt behind the machine told the story, clean even, no spinning. Every inch of those tracks represented force translated into motion. 220, 230. Rick Sievert's face was the color of raw steak. 240, 245. The Super M was slowing. The engine was pulling hard now, the exhaust coughing black under load. The tires were beginning to dig, not spin, but dig, pushing deeper into the track surface, finding the limit of what the ground could hold. 252 feet. The tires found that limit. The Super M stopped, the engine still running, the wheels turning slowly in the ruts, the chain still taut. Virgil held the throttle for 3 more seconds, giving the machine every chance to find 1 more inch, and then pulled it back to idle. 252 feet. 6 feet short of Rick Sievert's 4,440. The crowd exploded, not because Virgil had won. He hadn't won the class. Rick's 4,440 had pulled farther. But Virgil had done something that everyone in those grandstands would remember for the rest of their lives. A 26-year-old $800 tractor had pulled within 6 feet of a brand-new $40,000 John Deere 4,440. Within 6 feet. 97% of the distance, with 1/3 of the horsepower and 1/50th of the price. And Virgil had pulled past the 100-foot mark by 152 feet. The bet was won, $10,000. Virgil shut down the Super M, climbed off and walked across the track toward the grandstand. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pumping his fists. He was walking the way he always walked. Steady, unhurried, like a man who had exactly the right amount of time for whatever came next. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, 2,000 people on their feet for a man who had technically come in second place. Rick Sievert was standing by the announcer's booth, hands in his pockets, staring at the track. Virgil walked up to him. $10,000, Virgil said quietly. Rick looked at him. The confidence was gone. The salesman's polish was gone. What was left was a man doing math in his head and not liking the answer. Not the math of the bet, but the math of what this loss meant for his business. I pulled farther, Rick said. I won the class. You won the class by 6 feet. I won the bet by 152. We both got what we asked for. Rick reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote the check in front of the remaining crowd. Maybe 500 people who had stayed to see this moment. His hand was steady. His jaw was tight. He handed the check to Virgil. How did you do it? Rick asked. How does a 52-horsepower tractor pull within 6 feet of 130? Virgil folded the check and put it in his overalls. Your tractor makes 130 horsepower at 2,200 RPM, Virgil said. At that speed, in the gear you pulled in, you're putting about 8,000 pounds of force on the drawbar. My tractor makes 52 horsepower at 1,600 RPM, but in first gear, I'm putting about 5,500 pounds on the drawbar. You've got more force, but not as much more as you think. But traction is weight times friction. Your tractor weighs 14,000 pounds. Mine weighs, well, tonight it weighs about 8,200. You've got 60% more weight, which means 60% more traction. But your tires are new, hard rubber, designed for road and field, not for a pull track. My tires are 20 years old. The rubber's softer. The lugs are worn into shapes that grip better in mixed soil than factory-new treads. He paused, and I filled my tires with calcium chloride. Added about 1,500 pounds to the rear axle. You couldn't see it. Nobody could. Rick stared at him. You weighted the tires. I weighted the tires. And I put 200 pounds of railroad rail inside the frame. Legal in unlimited class. No rules against internal weight. You've been planning this. I've been planning this since March. Since I bought that Super M at the Kirshner bankruptcy auction and saw that the engine had low hours and the transmission was perfect. I knew then that if I weighted it right and geared it right, it would pull within range of anything you brought. Rick shook his head slowly. Not in anger, in recognition. He was a salesman, and he'd just been outsold. You know what this is going to do to me, Rick said. Every farmer in this county is going to walk into my showroom and say, why should I spend $40,000 when an $800 Farmall almost beat you. That's not my problem, Rick. My problem was proving that a good machine doesn't stop being good because a newer one comes along. Your problem is that you've been telling these farmers the opposite for 15 years. Virgil turned and walked back toward his Super M. The crowd was still buzzing. People were gathered around the Farmall, touching it, looking at it, taking pictures. An $800 tractor that had just earned $10,000 and cost a John Deere dealer something money couldn't buy back. Let me tell you what happened after the fair, because the story doesn't end at the track. Rick Sievert honored the bet. The check cleared on Monday. $10,000, the most expensive Saturday night of his career. But the real cost wasn't the money, it was the narrative. Within a week, every farmer in Chickasaw County and 3 neighboring counties had heard the story. Not just that the Farmall had pulled well, that the Farmall had pulled within 6 feet of a brand new 4440. The number stuck, 6 feet, 48 horsepower against 130, $800 against 40,000. The ratios were so dramatic that the story almost told itself. Rick's showroom traffic didn't drop immediately. Farmers still needed equipment, and Rick was still the only JD dealer in the county. But the conversations changed. Before the fair, farmers walked in and said, "Tell me about the 4440. After the fair, they walked in and said, "So, Rick, 6 feet, huh?" It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every sale became harder. Every trade-in negotiation started with the customer having leverage they didn't have before. If an $800 Farmall can do what a 4440 does, maybe I don't need a 4440. Maybe I just need to take better care of the tractor I've got. That was Virgil's real victory, not the $10,000 and not the pull itself. It was the idea he planted in every farmer's head that night, that the machine in their barn, the old one, the paid-for one, the one the dealer kept telling them to trade in, might be good enough, might be more than good enough, might be within 6 feet of the best that money could buy. Rick Sievert kept his dealership open through the 80s, barely. The farm crisis hit, tractor sales collapsed, and Rick survived on parts and service. He retired in '91 and sold the business to a larger dealer group. He never entered the tractor pull again. Virgil Tesdall farmed his 200 acres until 1994, when he was 79. He used the Super M for 16 more years after the fair. It didn't break, it didn't wear out, and it didn't ask for anything except oil, grease, and a man who understood it. He put the $10,000 in a savings account. He used it to send his youngest granddaughter, Karen, to Iowa State University to study agricultural engineering. Karen graduated in 1987, and the first thing she did when she got home was ask her grandfather to teach her how the Super M worked. "The whole thing?" Virgil asked. "The whole thing. Gears, drawbar, hydraulics, engine, everything. I want to understand what the professors didn't teach me." Virgil spent that summer in the barn with Karen, disassembling and reassembling the Super M, explaining what every part did and why the engineers in 1952 had designed it the way they did. Karen later said it was the best engineering education she ever received. "My professors taught me how to build new things," Karen told a reporter years later. "My grandfather taught me why old things still work. That's the education they don't offer in school." The Farmall Super M is still on the Tesdall farm. Karen maintains it now. She fires it up every July, the month of the fair, and drives it around the property, listening to the engine, feeling the gears, remembering the summer her grandfather taught her that 52 horsepower and a first-gear ratio were worth more than all the turbocharged diesels in the world. The 444 that Rick Sievert brought to the fair was sold in 1982 to a farmer in Fayette County. Last anyone heard, it needed a new turbocharger, $1,400, and was sitting in a shed waiting for a part. The Super M doesn't need a turbocharger. It doesn't need a computer. It doesn't need a sound guard cab or a power shift transmission or any of the things that made the 444 the future of farming in 1978. It just needs oil, grease, and a man or a woman who understands that the best machine isn't always the newest one. Sometimes the best machine is the one that was built to do one thing perfectly for 100 years. The Farmall Super M was that machine. And on a Saturday night in July of 1978, in front of 2,000 people who came to watch it fail, it proved it. 6 feet. That's how close the past came to beating the future. And every farmer who was there that night went home knowing something that Rick Sievert had spent 15 years trying to make them forget. The tractor in your barn is good enough. Take care of it. Understand it. Trust it. Because sometimes good enough is 6 feet from the best in the world. And 6 feet isn't much. The end.